Hello, my name is Joe Cartwright and welcome to my studio. Today we're going to be painting a peaceful, moody sunset at the beach. Looking at our reference photo, you can see that it's all about atmosphere. The way the warm orange of the sky melts into the cool blue-grey, and how the trees and the rocks are almost pure silhouettes against the light. What makes this scene really special are the long, soft reflections on the wet sand. It may look a bit tricky to get the glow right without making the painting look a bit too heavy, but I'll show you my process for balancing those deep darks with the light of the sky. As we go, I'll show you a few little tricks, like using a fan brush to paint these iconic Norfolk Pines. And if you stay with me till the end, we'll add some final touches, like some seagulls on the wet sand, and even a little puppy on the shore, just to bring this quiet moment to life. I've already done the sketch for this painting, so let's get started. As usual, first thing I'm going to do is turn my paper over and thoroughly wet the back. Alright, we'll let that sit there and we'll mix some colours. For this subject, we've got a nice blue-grey sky moving down into a burnt orange, and then the sand is a dark brown. And then we've got some wet sand, which will basically be a combination of the sky colours here mixed with some of the sand colour. For the sky, I'll start with some Cobalt Blue. Add a little bit of burnt sienna to that. It's probably too much burnt sienna, but that's okay because I've got to add more blue anyway. And just a hint of permanent rose. And that's pretty good. I've got way more there than what I need, but I'll use some of that when I'm painting the water and the reflections on the sand. And for the warm colour in the sky, that'll just be a burnt orange, which is, in my case, it's just going to be some cad orange with a little bit of burnt sienna to dull it off. And that's good too. Then for the sand, we'll start with lots of burnt sienna, lots of raw umber, and some French ultramarine. Important to test your colours on a scrap piece of paper, because this colour here is only very dark because of the depth of paint that's there. Test it on a piece of paper. This is closer to the actual tone. Now I want it to be a bit stronger than that, so let's add some more French ultramarine, burnt sienna, and some raw umber. Great, that'll do for that. Now I'll go back and wet the back of this paper again. Now remember, I'm not wetting the front. Lift that up and I'll wet my board. So I'm going to start with the blue of the sky. Now this is a sunset, and I happen to know that the sun sets in this area. So we're going to see a little bit of a lighter patch in the sky here, and then stronger tones in the distance. Just a little bit more cobalt blue. A little bit more permanent rose. That's better. Then I'll start moving into the orange. For the sand, I'll pick up this dark mix, drag the brush through the edge of the palette, take out about half of the paint. Then I'll dip it into the water about 1/4 of an inch. The reason for that is the distant sand is going to be lighter in tone than the foreground sand. Paint through these rocks. Start picking up some stronger paint. Now I've lightly marked where I want the dark sand to stop. but I'm leaving some extra white paper there because then when I paint the wet sand I can adjust that edge as I go. Now I'm going to add some more burnt sienna into this mix and a little bit more raw umber. Just to warm it up and also darken its tone. But I warmed it up too much, so I'll just cool it down again. Here we go. Now I'm going to give this a light spray because I've gone in quite heavy there and I want that paint to flow a little bit. Going in with lots of paint in my brush. Now, again, I want to keep plenty of water on this. I want this paint to flow down the paper. Just throw in a few undulations in the wet sand. just tilt that because I want this to flow into this area here. See how much shine is on my paper, so it's easy to make that paint flow. I don't have a lot of paint in my brush. The brush is not bouncing back to a point. Okay, I'll give it one more spray. Just a bit of paper there. I want to lighten some of these edges and soften some of them too. I'll go and dry that. Then we'll work on these distant trees, the hills, and the breakwater. For the trees, I'm just going to mix a dull, barely green colour. So just some French ultramarine, lots of raw umber. There's so little light in this subject that the trees are just a silhouette. In fact, most objects are just a silhouette. A little bit of French ultramarine. And just a small amount of cobalt turquoise. And that should do it. And then for the breakwater, just French ultramarine and burnt sienna should do that. And there's just a small amount of very distant hill that we can see. I'm just going to mix a grey with one of the blues. Doesn't really matter which one, French ultramarine or cobalt blue would do. Maybe just a bit stronger. I also had a small amount of permanent rose in that mix. And for the trees, I'm going to use my fan brush. If you don't have a fan brush, you can just get one of your round brushes and just splay the hairs out like that a little bit. I'll just show you how I would do that, but I'm going to finish it with a fan brush because it just makes it so much easier. And all you do with this is obviously it's a lot messier than using the fan brush. Something like that. But the fan brush just makes it a lot quicker and easier. Just a little flick up or drag up and then drag the brush to either side. These are Norfolk Pines. As they get older, they tend to not look quite so regular, less and less like a pine tree. It's important not to make these trees look like a hedge. Vary their size and the spacing between them a little bit. While the foliage is wet, I'll paint in some trunks. Not on all of them. Hint at some roofs or some sort of building. Now along here you can just see hints of cars, mainly the bonnet and the roof and maybe the window, but what I'm going to do is just draw a few lines like that. Vary the colour a bit. There's lots of big rocks along this breakwater. It's not a totally flat shape. Good. Now, while that's drying, let's work out some colour for the water. For the water, I'm just going to use some French ultramarine and some burnt sienna. Just marking in some of the bigger waves. You don't have to put them all in. Now I'm just diluting this as we get closer into this area. Just adding a little bit of cobalt turquoise to it at the moment, just to give it a hint of green. Really is not important. Dry brush strokes, just skimming the surface of the paper to leave more of a broken edge here. Again, I want to wet a couple of sections of this. Here we'll be reflecting some of the hillside. I'm just lifting some of the paint because the water is lighter due to the sky reflecting off the water. Just some dry brush strokes to break up some of these sharper edges. Later when this dries, I'll go in and put in some of the shadows under some of these ripples here. All right, I think that'll do for that. Let's dry it and then we can put in the last of the rocks and some final details. Okay, so I'm just thickening this. It's probably too thick now. The rocks are the darkest tones in this painting, so I'm going in with my thickest paint and darkest tones for these rocks. They're relatively small shapes, so I'll use a smaller brush. I'm trying to preserve, tiny little highlights at the bottom of the rocks. And these have a reflection. These trees in the distance will also have a bit of a reflection. Just going to lighten this mix with a little bit of water. The main thing to remember is the reflections are directly below the object being reflected. But the sand's not a perfect mirror, so you don't want super crisp reflections. Just hinted a reflection for these rocks here. And these figures will have a reflection. And as they're just standing there, both their feet will be touching the ground. So whenever the foot's touching the ground, the reflection will connect up with that foot. I think we'll put a little puppy in. That's Molly, my dog. And there'll be a little reflection there. Now, here there's bits of seaweed. Little dabs, just hinting at it. I don't want to overdo it. You can use marks like that to break up any edge that you find is too sharp. Put some seaweed along the shore here. We'll put in a few seagulls. Give it a reflection. Maybe another little one here. Oh, and we'll put some birds in the sky. You want to vary their size, vary their shape. Makes them quite small, and they're the ones that are in the distance. And I'm just doing this to just gently guide the eye into looking around this area, which is the focal area of my painting. I'm going to put a few rocks into the foreground. And just hint at a reflection. And hopefully, without being too obvious, the rocks lead the eye into my focal area again. Just some dry brush to add some texture to this rock. Now, just step back and have a look at, see what we might have missed. I think some of these ripples coming into the shore, little waves coming to the shore, will have a strong defined shadow right at the edge. Lost a bit too much foam there. I'm just going to get some white gouache. It's a very valid fix-it technique. If you go in too thick, it'll be too opaque and will lose that watercolor feel. If you've enjoyed this painting, please give it a like, and if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. It helps me out a lot. And if you're able, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I look forward to seeing you for the next one.